1, 2, 3.
While our weekly shows are edited to time for broadcast on public TV and community radio, we offer to our members and podcast subscribers the full uncut conversation. The following is from our episode, Solving Economic Inequality, an Occupy movement for this moment? It was recorded on July 23rd, 2024. These audio exclusives are made possible thanks to our member supporters.
That was a clip from All Day, All Week, an Occupy Wall Street story, a documentary directed by Marisa Holmes, who will join us in just a bit. Today on the program, we are asking, how do you tackle economic inequality? Studies show that massive gaps between rich and poor drive polarization and incline people towards nationalism and authoritarian rule, which makes inequality one of the most critical issues of our time. But it's been over a decade since crowds were in the streets and occupying public spaces in the U.S. and internationally, demanding fairness, as they put it, for the 99%. Today, we'll look back at the Occupy Wall Street protests, which seized a plaza in New York City not far from Wall Street in September 2011. And we'll talk about strategies for change. As the country careens to another election, just how is economic change actually made? And are we making any progress? Joining me again to co-host this conversation is Amir Khafagy, award-winning Report for America member with the online journal Documented. Amir, great to see you again. I have to ask, 13 years back, were you even aware of Occupy at the time?
Hi, Laura. Thanks for having me here again. It's always a pleasure. Occupy was one of the most important things that ever happened to my life. I was maybe 21, 22 years old. I was in community college, and I remember when that was happening downtown, and I was just a kid from Queens. And that was the beginning of my political awakening. It was really an amazing experience for me. That brings me to today's guests. Taifa Smith Butler is the president of Demos, a public policy organization working to build a multiracial democracy and economy. She came to Demos after a decade in leadership at the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute. Marisa Holmes' first book, Organizing Occupy Wall Street, This Is Just Practice, is just out. Among her films is the feature she directed, All Day, All Week, an Occupy Wall Street story, which focuses on the occupation at Zuccotti Park in New York in 2011. Welcome. So good to have you both here today.
It's great to be here.
Thank you so much for having us.
It's great to have both of you with us. Let's start with you, Marisa. You are a documentary maker, but you were deeply involved in the organizing and leadership in different ways at Occupy. Talk a bit about what that was for people who don't remember, who don't, perhaps like Amir or me, remember being there ourselves.
Sure. So there was an economic crisis that started in 2008, and a lot of organizing was happening through those crisis years of 2009, 2010, 2011. And internationally, of course, in 2011, there was the Arab Spring. And throughout North Africa and the Middle East, people who were affected by the crisis and also dealing with their own internal political situations and entrenched dictatorships rose up and called for direct democracy, and watching that in Spain and Greece, people took to the squares and had similar assemblies and tried to meet people's needs directly through mutual aid. And in the United States, we were watching that unfold and thinking, when is this ever going to happen here? Where the crisis started, right? In New York, on Wall Street. And kind of serendipitously, this call came out from Adbusters, which is a kind of culture jamming political magazine based in Canada. And some, more old school organizers in New York thought they're not going to do anything. They're just, artists. They don't do real, change. And so a lot of people were skeptical, but some of us who were, artists and cultural workers of, one form or another, and affected by the crisis, thought we should do something. We have to respond to this call. And so throughout the summer in 2011, we had assemblies in Tompkins Square Park on the Lower East Side and tried to, dream up what September 17th would be. September 17th was the day of action that Ed Busters had called for. And so we thought, well, we're having so much fun in these assemblies, and this is really about direct democracy and building alternatives. And so the action will be, this assembly, and we'll invite people in to create a movement with us. And that's kind of how it all began on day one, September 17th, 2011, when we took over Zuccotti Park.
Where were you, Taifa? Do you remember?
It's funny. I had started my role as deputy director of the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute in September of 2011, and it was after a big odd birthday for me. But I had just come off of a decade of doing sort of kids count, child welfare policy research work. And I remember, right after the Great Recession in 2008 and 2009, and when we saw such impact on families and a loss of a decade of wages and the slow recovery for Black and Brown communities and families and workers. And so in that 2011 period, knowing that we had a long haul of trying to really bring back the economy for those who have been so devastated, and to see the Occupy movement sort of take on the tax reform, the things that are really needed to address inequality in the country. And so being part of a sort of a tax organization that's focused on fiscal policy and tax policy and making sure we have the right kind of resources in our budget to support public goods, but also making sure that we have tax fairness, it just resonated heavily for me.
Well, we're going to be talking about those connections and the contrasting approaches that we can all take to making change. Marisa, I'd love you to share any moments that really stand out that maybe provoked questions that are with you still, or sense of pride that's with you still, or anything that really you want to share that you carry with you from Occupy to today.
The space of the occupation at Zuccotti Park, it was really a liberated space, and we ran it ourselves. We had these assemblies every day. We also practiced mutual aid through the various working groups. There was a People's Kitchen that served hot meals to occupiers multiple times a day, served thousands of people. There was a medic tent that did, free checkups for people, even their pets sometimes. There was just this incredible kind of outpouring of support, people who had skills dropping in and offering whatever they could. And we grew exponentially from an initial organizing group of maybe 30, 40 people to 4,000 active organizers. And so to me, it was really an indication that people are capable of engaging at scale and cooperating with one another, and if given the opportunity, we'll show up for one another even in the face of state repression. And so I will never lose that sense of possibility that that people can actually cooperate, make change together. And, even in the darkest of moments, I know that that's possible. So I guess that's the main thing. I mean, there's so many, key strategic moments and conflicts and things that I could talk about. But really, especially now, I'd like to hold on to what we made together, which was incredible. Beyond what we ever would have imagined, 1,000 other occupations popping off, and, all these various, offshoots, also different projects that continued, relationships that continued for years after. We really, I don't know, we created a space that was transformative and in a deep way.
I'm going to throw to Amir in just a second, but I have to ask you, Taifa, as you're listening to this, on the face of it, it can look like this kind of dreaming up an alternative world is very far from, advocating policy change. But I do wonder if you see the influence of that Occupy moment and that work in things like I don't know, Bidenomics, the Biden-Harris administration's stated rejection of trickle-down, or the mutual aid networks that sort of exploded after COVID or during COVID, or the global movement to divest from fossil fuels. I mean, are there places that you see the impact of that work intersecting with your own?
Yes, I think, I often meet with economic policy think tank leaders and those working in this space. And just recently, as we've been talking about what does post-neoliberalism look like, as we look at the economy and how it has been focused on free markets and individualism. And knowing right now we are in such a great moment with the labor movement, right? Demanding change, the rise of sort of that labor voice, the essential worker. And a lot of us harken back to it was Occupy that was one of those catalysts in the most recent generational history, right? That really sparked how a mass movement against the 1%, against the oligarchy can really have a great narrative message that resonates, but also sort of a policy platform to really do some real change. And so we've been thinking now, how do you see some of that, what we've learned through Occupy and what we're seeing now with One Fair Wage and other movements today that are really focused on building that labor power, that economic power for workers today. So that's one of the things that we know. There's been so many movements from Occupy and previous to that, civil rights, that we need to really take those lessons learned and replicate them today, because it's going to be necessary given the political environment we're in.
It's hard for me to fathom that it's been 13 years since Occupy. I remember when I went down there was so much hope and optimism. I really, as a young man, thought things were going to change immediately. Now, given 13 years have passed, what has been accomplished in combating inequality and inequity in this country? I don't know if you would like to elaborate further, Taifa, and then Marisa?
Yeah, I guess, as we're looking at the numbers, and the fact of the matter is today, 13 years after such an incredible movement like Occupy, we're no better off, right? If anything, things have worsened in terms of the kind of economic inequality that we see. And it has proliferated by and large because we believe that we have oligarchs who are controlling our politic and the policy making in addition to the economy. And if we are really going to be about building this multiracial democracy and economy that Demos, our vision is that, but we know there are a host of other people who believe that, we have got to seize control of our economy back into the hands of the people. And those reforms that are necessary are not top of mind for those who are, in the political class who are governing right now. And I think this is where movements like Occupy and the current labor movement is so important. And we are in a critical juncture right now with this presidential election to really name and claim and state the kind of vision we have and want and need for our economy that centers the people. And so to me, as we look at our tax reforms that are necessary with the upcoming TCJA, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that's coming up for reauthorization, it's a moment to reform our tax code so that it really does benefit the middle class and those that are struggling to get there. But again, you've seen corporations lobby and pay big dollars to push back against some of these policy interventions that we believe heavily resonate with the people. So those are the things to me that continue to show we have an outsized influence from the wealthy class, from oligarchs, and we've got to continue to push and fight.
Marisa, thoughts?
Yeah. During Occupy, we really rejected representative politics because it just seemed not responsive to people's needs, right? We thought, Obama coming in, he's going to save us, or he's going to, implement at least some reforms, and that didn't happen, right? Like there was this reluctance even then to respond to the crisis in ways that were really transformative and affecting people's lives, and especially Black and Brown communities and poor communities. So we just thought, we're going to do this ourselves. We have to build alternatives ourselves from the bottom up, through mutual aid networks, And some of that work continued, after the park at a neighborhood level through, Occupy Sandy, and then later different crisis responses. Certainly during the pandemic, we saw this exponential growth of mutual aid groups at a, very hyper local level, from, neighborhood to neighborhood, coordinating with one another. And so that's, what I think is going to transform the economy, people doing it themselves. And, at scale, beyond just like neighbor to neighbor, you have to think about actually building, worker co-ops and confederations of co-ops. And that has grown since 2011. There is more interest in solidarity economies and new co-ops forming across different industries. But, I think, in New York, there's the People's Choice Communications Group, reimagining what the internet can be from the bottom up. So, there are options available to us that are not just making, demands of politicians and hoping that, that this change is going to come. I mean, they're only going to respond if there is a real alternative in place. Yeah, that's what I thought in 2011, and that's what I think is still true to this day, seeing how things play out on the ground.
You have been doing some of that work, Taifa, at the Economic Democracy Project, with respect to kind of growing civic power, public goods, breaking up monopolies. Can you tell us about some of the things that you've been tracking out there, some of the experiments, some of the stories?
Yes. And I will say, I think part of Marisa, I hear you and really appreciate your point about, again, the people, us taking control and solving our own problems and really being innovative. And I think that's the important part of our Economic Democracy Project, was really looking at where the innovations are taking place, where communities are taking control, right, of our economic systems and demanding public, investment or co-governance, in that community members are making the decisions, right, about our resources. And that's an important element to how we need to co-govern to make sure that the needs in our communities are being met. So a couple of the things, Laura, I would just share that we were excited to write some case studies on and document where some of these innovations were happening. One of them in particular was in Pittsburgh with the Our Water campaign. Pittsburgh United fought back to get the water back into the control of the community. As we've seen with government decisions that have been made over time to privatize, to save money, right? Privatizing our public goods in the hands of corporations who, of course, aren't bottom line focused on the public good and making sure that services are being provided. They're focused on the bottom line of profit, right? And so what we've seen, to the detriment of communities when profits are king, that services are not great, public health risks end up happening as a result of what we saw in Flint, and it also happened in Pittsburgh. And so Pittsburgh United formed a great coalition and worked across the community and actually worked with the mayor's office and the development authority to get that corporation back out of the business of providing their water. And again, this shows us that there is the way that activism can happen, the way that community engagement and sort of naming an agenda that really can benefit the community long term, and working with those leaders in those seats of power to actually show up in a way that they can co-govern together. And that was a really exciting example of, again, a community saying, this is how we want to govern. We want to have oversight. We want to have transparency, and this is how we need to move forward. And to this day, that community is still working with the government of agencies. And another one I would say is the Texas Organizing Project in Harris County during Hurricane Sandy worked to make sure that they could one of the things that was insightful about this project was they saw the disparity and the inequity of the FEMA dollars that were being doled out to communities that were harmed by the hurricane. And more money was going to white neighborhoods who were less devastated than those that were going to Black and brown communities. And they helped create an equity tool that really helped reform the formula based on what was happening in the community, And they actually created a leadership institute that actually created positions where community members were running to actually be on these commissions to help inform how those dollars were being doled out. So again, community saying, hey, our this is some inequitable ways that money is flowing into our communities, and we want to ensure equity. We're going to run people to hold folks accountable. We're going to, make sure that these resources can get to our community. And today, that equity tool is still being used when it comes to hurricane relief and other disaster relief. So those are just some of the examples that if we can show them, and then like Marisa said, scale them and figure out how we can continue to model the kind of community leadership, the co-governance that's necessary to hold government accountable, and to think about other models that our economy can really thrive on. That's where I think we'll be able to push on the political apparatus to make sure that we can have the kind of reforms that will really benefit the people.
Well, it seems like democracy is there's an expanding definition of what democracy is, right? We're told we're living in a democracy, and it seems like most times democracy is just you vote every 4 years and that's it. But it seems like it's an expanding definition. Marisa, you're actively involved in organizing for MAC, right? The Metropolitan Anarchist Coordinating Council. What is anarchism to you? How do you define it? How is it related to people's everyday lives? Can you discuss some of that mutual aid work that your group is doing, and how does anarchism and democracy fit?
Well, we've been around for about 8 years. We started in response really to the rising threat of fascism in 2016 and realized there needed to be a more coordinated place for people to come to protect each other, take care of each other. And since then, we've done a lot of different projects supporting immigrant workers, supporting queer and trans folks who are getting attacked by police. But we've also been doing a lot of mutual aid. And that's really, I think, the foundation of the community that we've built. And every Sunday, like third Sunday of the month, we get together and we have this care assembly, which includes an exchange part of it where people do requests and offers, and some of those requests are very immediate and very intense, like emergency housing or fleeing a domestic violence situation, or running low on food stamps and needing help finding access to food. And sometimes it's people who just need like someone to watch their dog or whatever it is. There's a range of needs that people have. But we try to forefront the ones that are the most urgent and really, support each other. So like out of this network, people have some of their needs met, community is strengthened. And I mean, I can tell you that, if it didn't exist, some people wouldn't have those, they wouldn't have housing, they wouldn't have support. So yeah, that's the kind of work that we've been doing. And how does that relate to democracy? Well, I mean, we're building this space that is both meeting people's needs and is democratic, which I think is essential. And that's what anarchism is in practice. It's, having a direct say, meeting needs directly, not, going through official channels, not going through the state, or relying on capital investments, but instead, doing things together. So, yeah, to me, it's like it's the most obvious, immediate embodiment of anarchism. That's how it's related.
Laura Flanders and Friends asks the questions we need to be asking to move forward. While the commercial media is centered on what sells advertising, which is too often fear, we're centered on change makers, imagining a better world and creating the solutions to get us there. That's thanks to the generous support of viewers and listeners like you. While we are independent media, we do depend on you. Please contribute by making a one-time donation or make it monthly. Go to lauraflanders.org/donate. As Angela Davis says, when vast numbers of people come together, this is how change happens. Please come together with us now. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your continued support. Now back to our conversation.
You have an expanded definition of democracy, too, at Demos, Taifa. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, ultimately, it is about control. It is about ensuring that people, communities have control over our economy and our sort of democratic practices so that they are beneficiaries of the decisions that they make. And by and large, we have been really thinking about this sort of clear lens around power, because at the end of the day, it's about control, and again, it's about who gets to make the decisions. And I think for us, we have always been, particularly people of color, and just the general populace who aren't governing, who aren't the wealthy or the oligarchs pulling the strings, we've borne the brunt of those decisions that have been oftentimes made behind closed doors, right? Whether you're looking at the city council or the state legislature or, in the Beltway in DC, where those decisions are made. And so for us, it's, Demos has always talked about the inextricable linkness of economic power and political power. And today, as I think about sort of where we are historically, sort of with the retraction of resources, with the threat of authoritarianism and fascism, and this demographic shift that is happening in our nation, and the inequality that continues to proliferate, if we do nothing, we'll be looking at apartheid in America, and we'll be looking at sort of this growing diverse population who will be a majority in 20 years with no economic and political power, no net wealth. And again, we'll be looking at how a country like the United States will be able to fare globally with that kind of outsized, unchecked inequality. And so for us, that power, that paradigm is what is important for us today, is how do we actually ensure, and we've created, Laura, sort of a power agenda that we'll be working on over the next couple of years, because we know that we need to have economic security. Every family deserves to be economically secure and also economically mobile. And to your point, Marisa, I appreciate, and what does mobility look like from family to family? How do I, see as a parent, as a worker, like, what do I want? What will make me thrive? And people being able to have agency in those choices, as opposed to being oppressed and exploited in our economy. So those are the kinds of things that we really want to see in terms of how we move and build power, economic security for all and mobility for all. And there's a clear linkage to our democracy. Is there full political participation? Are people's voices able to be heard, to be seen, to be represented well? And to the point of government, at the end of the day, I know, and I appreciate the work that Marisa's doing with the anarchy and sort of the mutual aid, because that's an important element. But at the end of the day, the government has a role to play in solving public problems and solving for the public good. And we cannot allow them to step away and not fulfill that responsibility.
Taifa, could you share some of those strategies about the Demos power agenda? I think people would be really interested in knowing how we're going to get there. We know a lot of people are aware of what the issues are, and they feel it every day in their lived experience. But what are those strategies we're going to do to accomplish those things?
Yes, I appreciate that. Our team, we just launched this power agenda in March, and we're working diligently to think about what the policy interventions need to be. And there's no secret. We, Occupy and others have talked about just the rights for workers to be able to get fair wages, to be able to have the kind of health care and child care and all of those things that are really important for their own livelihood and for the benefit of their families. And so we're looking at this in a couple of ways. ways from our economic justice work and our democracy work. And part of this is thinking about, one, if we are really going to reimagine public goods in this country and reinvest in sort of the infrastructure, which I appreciate the Biden administration has done to really invest in that infrastructure, we need to think more about how we reform this tax code so that those who have the means will pay more and pay a fair share. And so our team, along with a host of organizations, are really working this year as we are going into this new election cycle and the reauthorization of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2025. It is likely to be reauthorized. Some of us are fighting for more provisions in there around exemptions for families and to fix this corporate tax cut and the cut at the top. So those are one ways that we do this. And then the other thing is, how do we seize the moment with labor? With the industrial policy that has passed the Biden administration, with the industrial policy from the infrastructure bill and the CHIPS and the BIL bill, like there's an opportunity for us to take those investments and really get them into the hands of communities. And that's the thing that we see over the next 10 years. If we can move those dollars to really rebuild infrastructure, internet access, and all the things that are really critical for families as a baseline to help ensure that economic security, those are some of the things that we think are really, really important. So seizing the labor movement, always looking at wages and workplace democracy. How do we improve it and reform it so that people are not exploited, like I said, and are getting fair wages and able to do all the things that they want, like take leave, paid leave, care for their families, and those sorts of things. And I would just say, on the other side of what's really important from a democracy standpoint, how are we actually reforming the access to the ballot, but also creating more ways where, like Marisa said, the communities have a voice. They're engaging in new models of sharing and caring and doing the things that will really meet their needs. So there's a number of ways that our team is thinking about the policy levers, and we'll have more on that later on this year and into next year.
Marisa and Amir, really everybody. I mean, there's a moment in your film, Marisa, where, Occupy Wall Street, just talking about the New York protest, the New York encampment, has grown enormous. Like you're at day, 49 or something. It's huge. It's gone from 40 people to 4,000 people, and all sorts of other folks start showing up. And you make the point in the film that there were a lot of politicians who started showing up, and nonprofit leaders, and all sorts of folks who had different agendas with respect to the movement. And there's so many ways of looking at that. On the one hand, wow, you got their ear. Some of those folks went on to get elected in New York and have an influential role. On the other hand, it's like, whoa, they're trying to kind of co-opt this people's movement that wasn't really about them. So as we are approaching this election, I just love you to talk about how you think about it. Do you see, in the 30s, there was that discussion of sort of the laboratories of democracy, what people did on the ground to address need and crisis during the years of the Depression. Some of those things became policy in a positive kind of way. But I'm also haunted by stories we have in the recent history where things like the American Rescue Plan child tax credit, did a great thing, reduced inequality, and then wasn't extended by the Congress. So I just would love your thoughts on how do you operate in this moment on the verge of another super important election?
Well,
and I hear that sigh. We want better. We want different. We got this. Now what do we do?
I mean, this moment is kind of a long time coming, though, right? Because the Democratic Party was challenged internally by progressive members who tried to push it and get elected, and the DNC didn't really make room for them, right? So what we have in the Democratic Party is really a neoliberal elite, and so all of the accusations from the right wing, from fascists who are coming up, they're not entirely untrue. Some things are lies, right? We've detailed all the lies, various op-eds and things that people have written. But some of them are true, like the fact that that there is this incredible inequality that's continued, and stratification of wealth. So I think we need to keep that in mind, that it is actually like the entrenchment of a political class in this country and its alliances with capitalism that creates an opening for fascism to come in. And we know that economic populism coming from J.D. Vance and others is a total sham, that they're not going to solve the problems of poor folks in this country, but they're able to put that forward because of a failure of liberals, especially the Democratic Party. So that's the situation that we're in, and it's been years in the making. So hopefully we're not just blindsided by the fact that there is this rising and institutionalizing of fascism, and it's very scary.
And we should say it's not just in this country, but internationally.
But internationally,
that's right.
Yeah, and how to prepare for that? I mean, there are a lot of conversations happening, but I think we need to first and foremost keep each other safe, keep communities safe that are directly affected by the violence that is going to increase. So undocumented folks, Black folks who are getting hassled by police, queer and trans folks who are going to lose their health care, et cetera, et cetera. There's so much violence that is going to be unleashed, and that needs to be at the forefront of our minds. How do we protect each other? How do we keep each other safe? And so I think some kind of program of trainings at bare minimum, jail support, legal defense, anti-repression type trainings, medical trainings for probably more confrontations happening on a day-to-day level, and in mobilizations. Thinking about how to, just to survive this this escalation that's about to happen. And so that's the first thing. And then long term, it is still building alternatives that meet people's needs, so that fascists don't have this, this inroad, right? They can't just use populist rhetoric, we have to actually address the underlying problems.
Taifa, you're nodding.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And to your point, Laura, just being able to talk with some folks in the UK recently, and folks from around the globe at the Skull World Forum recently, to realize the threat of authoritarianism and sort of this fascism is global, also in nature and sort of this rise of the far right, but also the sort of anti-LGBTQ, the rise in Christian nationalism. It is happening on every continent and on this planet. And so what does that mean for just global economy and global sort of well-being of people, as not only in the U.S., we see the rise of, a sort of a different and diverse demographic of Black and brown folks who will be, projected to be majority people of color nation, but also sort of, I think it's projected over the next maybe 40 years, 1 in 3 people will be from the continent of Africa. And what does that mean in terms of global migration patterns and climate change? And so there's a host of things that we need to be thinking about long term, that if we don't center sort of the needs of people and their livelihood and their well-being, instead of corporate profits and, people wanting to grow their, we will have a detrimental situation in our community. To follow up to your point is that, we are really in a critical moment of really needing to do serious business to protect not only the livelihood, like I said, of our people, but to really push on the political and changing policy. Because the status quo is just not working. And again, it's worsening things, particularly for the economy and the economic well-being of people. So I hope that, in this moment, as we're going into this election cycle, that people will really take stock of sort of this populist message that is really inherently, racist and divisive, and that mutual aid and that love for humanity will rule at the end of the day. Because again, as an organization like Demos, who really understands sort of the intersectional work that has to happen between our democracy and economy and racial justice at the end of the day, if we continue to use these sort of narratives of othering and the sort of makers and takers and all the narratives that we see and tropes within our economy about who's deserving and who's not, we are not going to strengthen our economy. And we've got to reject the trickle down economics theories and narratives, because we know that they're not working. So again, I think to have real examples like what Marisa's working in New York, and some of these other examples from communities, like you said, Laura, that can be proof points and points of concept that really can change how we think about our economy. Those are the things that we need to scale and to grow and to really create the kind of policies around those.
Taifa, Marisa, let me just tell you right off the bat, it's hard not to be really pessimistic right now, right? It's really hard. A lot of young people are really apathetic to what's happening. It seems like we're not even watching an election or watching some weird reality show, right? It doesn't feel real to us. A lot of people feel like there's no hope, there's nothing worth it for them to even do or to participate. What would the both of you say in terms of what should we do? How do we shake off this apathy, this pessimism, and really do something and take charge of our democracy?
Well, Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah, Occupy Wall Street. But what does that mean? Like, for the whole society, right? Like beyond one particular, park in the financial district. How do we do that in workplaces and neighborhoods and our everyday lives? That continues to be the question. And we are doing some of that work in MAC through the care assemblies, through mutual aid projects, and also, talking to young people. I mean, since you mentioned young people, this summer I've been working on a summer liberation school, and it's basically an anti-authoritarian collective liberation framework. So trying to really think about how to do direct democracy and mutual aid and solidarity economy work in exactly this intersectional way, dealing with equity. So that's what we're talking about with, 18, 19, 20-year-olds who come. And it's been really great just to sort of see their questions and work through things. And of course, it's one contribution, but if everyone makes these kinds of contributions, if everyone, holds a school or does a mutual aid distro or participates in some way, then, we can change things.
Taifa?
Agreed. I will say one learning that I've seen from an organization in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, is Block, Black Leaders Organizing Communities. And they had a youth ambassador program. And to hear these young people present, these are 17, 18, 19-year-old young folks who are actually galvanizing and organizing their community, canvassing, knocking doors, telling people why they should engage. It's that kind of activism at such a young age that even if they're apathetic and feel like their vote doesn't matter or their voice isn't being heard, to actually be so close, to the issues, I think is the thing that really will light people up and keep them engaged. And I think, again, one voice, one vote, like all of us is about making sure that we are seen and heard. And so I know, there was a lot of apathy for this election in particular, but there's also so much on the line. The stakes are very, very high and people cannot sit out. And I think, as we continue to do the political education that's necessary about this moment and what the real options are and what the real impact is in terms of these choices that are going to be made if we sit out or not, I think it's better for us to engage. And so that's the encouragement I see right now from young people, and would continue to encourage them to just engage.
You can't build your economic experiment behind bars, or at least not the one you had in mind. Let me ask you the closing question we ask all of our guests, Marisa and Taifa. I don't want to forget that word that you mentioned at the very top, Marisa, about dream and experience, that kind of corporeal, in your body experience that you had of living a different way. And I think, Amir, you talked about it too when you talked about your experience at Occupy. And I know I've been fueled by experiences like that over my life. When you think about the future, the story the future will tell of now, I don't know, 25, 50, 100 years, take your pick. What do you think that story will be? Let's start with you, Marisa, and then Taifa, I'd love to get your answer to the same question.
It'll be a story of people who decided not to live under tyranny and felt that it was worth it to resist and still make another world happen. I'm sure that there will be a lot of people taking a lot of risks to ensure that they have freedom. But that's the moment we're in. We're in a moment of a lot of conflict and also a lot of people realizing the best versions of themselves.
I love that. As I think again about this power agenda that we've launched and the vision over the next 2 decades, 3 decades, 50 years from now, if we could create sort of this long-term vision of what does freedom and liberation really look like for all the people, is that people are thriving, they're living with joy, their families are well, they are able to experience the things that they want to experience in their lives without the threat of harm, physical harm. They're healthy. We've got good health systems that keep people healthy and well. We've got investment in public goods where people aren't struggling to make ends meet because they're being paid a decent wage and they're able to, care for their loved ones. So just thinking about what it will take for us to really transform and have a people first economy, right? And a people first democracy where we're actually making the decisions and we're controlling, the choices that are being made so that outcomes benefit all of us. That's like the vision that I see for us and really want us to strive through to, I should say. And I really think, to Marisa's point, it's going to take both and. It's going to take the policy reforms and the sort of governing power that we really need for the people, but it'll also take philanthropy to show up and invest in real intentional ways to solve for the day, and also us taking control of our own destiny and really working to support one another. And that's where humanity at the end of the day should be king.
Taking control of our destiny and the banks, just for a thought. Amir, how's your pessimism doing?
I feel like
eroded at all?
I feel like I'm stuck in between both of our guests. I don't have as much as an optimistic view of where we're headed, and it hurts me as a reporter. I see every day the struggles people are going through and experiencing. But what I do know is this: nothing will change unless we make the change.
Amen.
That's
woman,
right.
Person. Thank you all. It's great to have you. Amir, Marisa, Taifa, thanks for joining us here at Laura Flanders and Friends.
Thanks for taking the time to listen to the full conversation from our episode, Solving Economic Inequality, an Occupy movement for this moment. It was recorded on July 23rd, 2024. These audio exclusives are made possible thanks to our member supporters. Please join our members now by making a one-time donation or by making it monthly. A little goes a long way. Go to patreon.com/Laura Flanders and Friends, or make that one-time donation at lauraflanders.org. That's also where you'll find more information on this conversation in the episode notes. That's patreon.com/Laura Flanders and Friends. And thanks again to all our member supporters.